SEALs, and they've shared some stories of different pranks that they've done on each other in the SEAL team, and some pretty crazy ones. Do you have any prank stories from your time of being in
the Marines?
The Marines.
Wow, not prepared for that question. I don't really know the background of the SEALs that you were with, but it's kind of as an infantry officer, we weren't in the process of like making a lot of pranks on people.
You guys
and
are
stuff.
more serious.
Well, I mean, you're in command of a bunch of Marines and stuff.
Yeah, obviously, VMI.
Yeah. VMI.
You can't get out that easy.
I mean, yeah.
Wait, what's that? What did you say?
So a lot of shenanigans at VMI. I think the
wait, what's BMI?
VMI.
VMI.
Not BMI, not like your body mass index.
No,
VMI. Okay.
So I went to a military college called the Virginia Military Institute, and it was all male all the way on 2001, and then they started admitting females after a Supreme Court decision to do so. And so it had a very, intense male kind of culture. And as you can imagine, I mean, when I graduated in 2005, there were only 7 or 8 females that graduated from my class out of 250 something. So,
any good prank stories?
Yeah. I mean, if we're gonna
not gonna tell us.
If we're gonna go that route, I had one roommate who, for whatever reason, had this fascination with just driving people crazy. So our room, our second class year, was right next to the shower.
Sharing the stories.
Yeah. Okay.
And so he thought it was hilarious that he would go in and like just randomly collect everything that person went into the shower with. There were these open showers, right? And so of course they're like standing there.
They get out.
They had to run back naked.
But then eventually everybody figured out who it was, right? So he knew where to get his stuff, but he still had to walk in the open barracks because there's no hallways. It's just
no towel
like
either.
It's like an open. The inside of the barracks is all open, so you can see from one side to the other all the rooms.
So you just see this guy like butt naked,
streaking, walking from the shower, and they just bang on our door. Give me my stuff.
Oh, but it was your roommate who was doing it.
It was my roommate.
So you get all these naked guys
just
showing up in your room. No.
And there's no doors. There's no locks on the doors.
Oh boy.
So people can just walk in and out.
So no privacy.
Really. No locks on the doors. So you're just getting these naked guys whipping the door open, soaking wet.
So this reminds me of calm down.
I didn't mean it that way.
So this reminds me of a friend of mine, and he went on a honeymoon with his new bride.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, yeah, we had our first fight. What happened, bro? And he's like, well, she got in the shower. And he said, I thought it'd be funny to play a prank that we always played on each other, which is to throw a bucket of ice water on her.
I've done that.
And he's like, I threw it on her. I thought it was hilarious. And he said,
you don't do it to women.
Crying. He goes, and I've never had a buddy of mine cry when I've done the prank before.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
The pranks you play on not like guys with guys, like you can't do that with women. Some of them are mean. Yeah.
Okay, my question for you. If you could stay up till 2 a.m. having a discussion with any philosopher.
Oh, wow. I mean, it's Aristotle without a question.
What would you talk about?
I would be most interested in a little bit like when Einstein describes how he envisioned the theory of relativity, he describes himself as traveling on a beam of light. And to me, just conceptually, that's like so incredible to think of. So I wonder, how did he come up with the understanding of that free will was part of human existence? What was man-made and what wasn't? The whole idea of metaphysics and how it related to politics. I mean, these are all his essentially inventions. I mean, he's the one that wrote the most studied body of literature on these subjects, metaphysics and politics. And they're two things that have driven me a lot through my life.
Love it.
What's the craziest meal you've eaten in an overseas operation?
Like in the military?
Yeah.
So I think like the specifics of it are kind of irrelevant. I mean, it was a lot of like okra, in some random
fried okra?
No, it's like they take this tomato paste. This is in Afghanistan. They take this tomato paste they get from Afghanistan, and then they take okra and they kind of boil it till it becomes mush. And then you
Yummy.
have this,
Tasty.
then you have this
Okra
bread.
does become mushy.
They kind of still have the snotty texture.
Like the
in
Yes,
there.
sliminess.
it is like
Lovely.
a snotty texture, and then you have
Lovely.
the bread. And it's not so much the food itself. It's just because it's not sanitary. I remember I came back from an operation and the doc was like, hey, sir, you got to stop eating local food. Like you're seriously, because I was just dehydrated. I was getting sick all the time and stuff. But, eventually my body did get used to it. But I remember the Marines, for whatever reason, it must have been like Thanksgiving or it was some holiday. They wanted a goat so bad. And so I was like,
A goat?
A goat. I don't know why. They wanted to cook a goat. I'm like, yeah, okay. So they go.
Do you like goat meat?
Not particularly. No, it's pretty like,
I like goat cheese.
I love, well, I'm a big sheep cheese guy,
Yeah.
but
All right.
Anyway, so we range with the like local partner, the Afghan National Army, and they go out, they get the goat and they bring it. And so the A&A guys were like, hey, who's going to kill the goat? And the Marines were like, we thought, well, and then this one guy from like, I don't know,
Aw.
from Tennessee, he's like, I got you.
I
You know
got
what I
it.
mean?
Of
He
course.
just-
I will kill
Yeah,
the
like a
goat.
southerner.
But you can see all like the city boys were Marines were like, what do we
My
have
mom
to do?
had me killing goats
That's
from a young
right.
age. Some farm boy. Love it.
Yeah.
Okay, if you could describe America in 3 words, what
Mhm.
words would they be?
Freedom, strength.
Yeah.
And I would say honor.
Beautiful. I love it. So I kind of want to jump in here. So we had this discussion off air the other night, and we really got deep, and that's kind of what made us go, hey, we actually need to do a podcast about this. We got into the subject of women empowerment or female empowerment. And this has become something of a buzzword now, and it's thrown around a lot, and you see it on social media, and female empowerment, women empowerment. But in our discussion, we started getting really deeper into some historical context to understand it. And then also this idea globally of how women are treated in different areas and the things that we're still facing today as a nation and why they're there. And we both shared some kind of more personal stories of just our own experiences. And so I would love to just hear from you. I mean, you've traveled extensively. You have a very deep knowledge of history. I would love for you to share your perspective on women and the treatment of women, both in our nation and in the world, let's say in the past 100 years, just touching on that. And then, I'd love to just get in and kind of dissect what are some of the issues that we're still dealing with here today, and why is this such an empowering thing? Why is it such an important thing for societies and for nations, the treatment of women? So love to just hear a little context from you, pick your brain a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you for having me. And I'll also say that I've been thinking a lot about this since we had dinner and we discussed it briefly. I'm going to ask both of you a question I've been thinking a lot about after I kind of give an intro.
Yeah.
But, I think the thing that we have to acknowledge as Americans is there is so much virtue in where we have come. And understanding our history and knowing what the status of women was, 100 years ago. So 2021 marked the 100-year mark of women's suffrage, which is impossible to imagine when you think of us being the country of freedom, the country of equality and the Constitution that we have. And so what it really says about our founders, and I've said this to you before, is that it was aspirational. They knew what right looked like. They had conceived it intellectually. They built the structure for human beings to be able to achieve it in reality. And I think one of the things that puts a lot of us off when it comes to talking about women's empowerment is that when it's not grounded in reality, what are you really talking about? And what does it mean to empower somebody? And I think we'll talk about that a little bit later. But, starting back at a historical context or historical reference, there are places in the world, and there's 2 that I gave as examples the other day, which is in Kurdistan, in the parts of Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Turkey, which is, a people who are Indo-European. They're matriarchal, so they predated Islam. They kind of they became or forced to become Islam. They're originally Zoroastrian. Zoroaster taught good words, good deeds, good thoughts. And so you can really tell by these people that the women is the nucleus of the family, and the female is a very powerful position in their culture. They have female fighters, female politicians, female in business. And so I learned a lot from what does empowering women really mean from them. another good example are the Jews in Israel. And I focus specifically on the cultural and religious context of Israeli Jews, in the sense that, Judaism has passed through the women and through that the mother and through that lineage, and the female form and females in that culture have so much influence. They've had a female prime minister, long before Western countries ever had one. And so when you see what that does to a society, especially a society or a culture that has years and years, centuries of oppression, but still is able to maintain a lot of strength, a lot of identity, a lot of linguistic, cultural, historical identity, it comes a lot from the equality that both men and women share, because they have to preserve it equally. Right. And I think in the work that I've done, in war and research or whatever it is, what I've found is the value of this is not because of some kind of social agenda or some kind of political agenda. It's the practical reality of what it means to how we live our lives. When women represent 50% of the population and they are oppressed, we're all oppressed. And I mean that in the sense that women are our mothers, they're our sisters, they're our daughters, they're our significant others in many cases. And so they have a significant role in how they raise and influence people. And so if women are oppressed in society, then little boys start to see what they think women should be treated like, and little girls don't understand how they should be treated. And that reduces equality throughout the entire culture. So there is a practical reality of the value of what it means to empowering women. But I think, and this is my leading into my question to you both, what does it mean as two beautiful, powerful, successful women to be empowered? What does it mean to you?
Mm.
So Lauren, I'm so excited to have you a part of Rachel Shear Nutrition, but what are some of the reasons why you wanted to join the Rachel Shear Nutrition team?
When I looked at the projections of where functional medicine is expected to go over the next few years, it's going to skyrocket, as well as telemedicine. So when I got to see, hey, this is an opportunity not just to be on the forefront of a conversation about the paradigm of healthcare changing in our nation today, but also a movement to equip those leaders who will lead the way. That's an incredibly exciting thing. So I'm excited to see what's ahead because, honestly, we're just getting started.
I know, we're just getting started. Yeah. And it's so exciting to see how functional nutrition and functional medicine truly is the healthcare of the future. And I am so excited to see the amount of health coaches and dietitians, nurse practitioners, and nurses who are wanting to get into this field, who are wanting to truly make an impact. They're sick and tired of having only 15 minutes with clients who really don't actually want their advice, and to be able to also create the freedom that they truly want in their life as well, to create the impact and the income. So if you guys are listening to this and you want to learn more about how you can get in on functional nutrition and become certified with your background as a health coach or a practitioner, you can head over to rachelshear.com/certification and you can learn more about our certification process.
Big things ahead.
Big things ahead.
To be self-empowered?
Right. If we're talking about empowering women, and I'm going to empower you, describe to me, what does that mean?
I think to really, it really comes back to me about just seeing another human being for who they are and being able to see the power, the authority, the gifts, the skills, the talents, whatever it is, as people who are both incredible human beings. And so that for me specifically, like female empowerment, I'm not particularly fond of like the boss babe movement or I'm the female this or that, because at the end of the day, it's not just about, I need a special category. I think for me, it's really about someone being able to recognize in another person who you are, and to allow the other person a maximum freedom to be who they are, next to you in any way that takes place.
And at dinner, we talked a bit about equality and what that really actually means. And men and women are fundamentally different, right? Men are stronger. We talked about how there's not that there's women who aren't stronger than men, but if we look at the reality, men and women aren't equal. But where the problem comes in is when a woman is viewed less than in terms of worth. And so when I think about woman empowerment, it's honoring the fact that women and men are fundamentally different. I know as a woman, I want to be treated like a woman. I do not want to be treated like a man. I want to be honored for my femininity. I want somebody else to see the light, the beauty, the unique gifts that I bring as a woman uniquely, and how I am different than the uniqueness that men also bring. But also, I don't want to be viewed less than. And I think that's where when people are, or men or whoever, are seeing women more as less than in terms of value, it's like, oh, she's a woman, she's not as smart, or she can't, I'm not saying can't do some of the things that men can do, because fundamentally there are some things, like if we go into strength and all of that. But I think it is more so approaching women from the frame of equals in terms of worth more than anything, and not objectifying women and placing their worth solely in maybe the physical beauty. So looking at them as an object, looking at them as less intelligent. So not seeing their value in the workplace and what they can bring in different areas of business. And so that's where I think people get really confused between the difference between fundamentally we are different and we each have unique gifts, but there's not a less than or a better than.
This goes back to my kind of original point a little bit earlier, which is that whatever empowering or power is, it's something based in reality. And so when you start to create kind of these ideas about what it means to empower somebody that are detached from reality, then you lose all credibility. And people kind of get a sense for that. And I think that's what you're talking about. I mean, in my view, there's nothing more powerful than being able to create human life. And women are the ones who create human life. And I think that, when you are looking at a woman and you're seeing what they're able to do for society and for human beings, there is nothing more valuable than that. And I do think a lot of the way women or men, let's just say in the context of men in this case, approach women, it is out of fear. It is out of insecurity. It is, and that's what I see in other cultures, certainly. But do you think that your power is something somebody gives you, or it's inherent to your existence?
I would say it's inherent to my existence. And so I think the need for the empowering denotes the fact that there's been an active suppression. But I don't think that you can give that power to another person. It belongs to me. It's who I am.
Right.
But in the absence of that, I think that, the fact that it needs to be a subject means that there's somehow been oppression or suppression of someone's natural ability to express that power.
I think both can coexist. I think women and all people, we can inherently stand in our power, and simultaneously somebody else can also empower another person, because even though we are uniquely our own, we are people who co-regulate with other people. Our nervous systems interact with other people. And if we look at the masculine and the feminine relationship, and we look at kind of that original intent, the woman does follow the leadership of the man. So based off of that, if a man is either intimidated by a woman's success and her power and feels the need to puff up or even shrink down, and I know we talked a little bit about that, yes, the woman can stand and have her power, but to say it's not going to have any effect, I think that neglects the fact that as humans, we have an influence over each other.
Absolutely. And we talked about energy and things like that. But
no, I just have a question for you. It was interesting to me when we spoke, because we know a little bit about the history of our nation in terms of women's rights and this kind of thing. But I don't think we as Americans take a lot of time to understand some of the global perspective on this. Are Americans ahead of the game in empowering women, or have we trailed behind in offering women some of the basic rights in comparison to other nations?
Well, I think it's an important distinction when we talk about equality, right? So there's one idea, a concept that man created, which is equality under the law, right? We've created a government, and then that all people will be treated under the law. And once again, when we did that, clearly women weren't, to include other groups of people, right? Yep. And I think that we've done a lot in modern history to kind of make that, to redress that or to correct that. But I think culturally, we're still far behind. We still have this idea of, should a woman be president? Who cares that she's a woman? Should the best person be president? And let's be honest. I mean, the kind of underlining influence of American Puritan culture and kind of the view of women. And I think that in our culture, we have a fear of sexuality, and women are the sexual, they represent sexuality in society and in the world. And so I think that we have this kind of inherent cultural fear of it, and it makes us nervous, and it manifests itself in so many ways. But if she's the best person to do the job and make the decisions necessary to do that job, then great. And I think what you said about how women and men are different is important to acknowledge and to admit that that's a part of reality, and that's not a good or a bad thing. It just is. And so you can empower women and see the power in them for what are their traits and what are their gifts and what are their talents, and how do you support them to maximize those. To me, that's really what empowering means. It's not something you can give somebody, it's something they have inherent in them that you recognize, and then you try to find whatever way you can in order to make them grow that, or let it grow and then amplify in other parts of their life. And so they become a stronger, more capable human being and maximize their life.
What would you say female empowerment, with good intentions perhaps, it's mutated this movement into something that's maybe not helpful or counterproductive?
Well, it's become a political ideological agenda, right? And so now, instead of thinking about how do I see you for who you are and recognize not just the good, but the bad, we all have it, right? We all have our weaknesses, we all have our strength, but recognizing that and acknowledging it. If you don't want to do that, if you don't want to acknowledge and be self-aware of who you are, then it turns into this kind of idea of just do whatever I tell you I want you to do for me, right? Regardless of the reality based in it. And there's no value in that. It's counter to reality. It's counter to human existence. And so now it's become a political agenda where it's a tool used by people either to make them feel like they have leverage on people in kind of a very negative way. And I think it's depowering because it's delusional. Or, people are using it to try to get power over others, right? To control how they see themselves or how they see their role in society. In a way that isn't based in actual fact or in reality as we see it. And we're seeing a lot of that. And I think that's destructive to not only the individual, but the people that are perpetrating it.
I was curious earlier as you were talking about sexuality. Is there a connection, in your opinion, between sexuality and power? Because you mentioned that women represent more sexuality, and there's a desire. There has been suppression of femininity. So if we draw the connection between suppression of femininity and sexuality that we've also seen, is there also a connection there between sexuality and power?
I think there is, right? Because I think that people who, and we talked a little bit about this before, but we'll just go over it again, is that in order to be powerful, you have to be self-aware. And I think that there's a really important aspect of this is that sexuality can make people very uncomfortable if they're not comfortable in themselves. And so when you have a society, and we certainly were one that started off, American culture was very conservative, socially conservative, theologically conservative. And as a function of that, we had very strict views on how people should or shouldn't behave that I think are antithesis to human nature. And so there are consequences of that. So I think that when you suppress something in people, it needs to find a way to escape.
Mm-hmm.
And that can happen. And it usually, if it's not done in a positive, natural way, it's going to come out in a very negative, detrimental way. And I think that that's what you found in American culture. And so what's really remarkable, in my opinion, just to talk a little bit about what's happened in Northeast Syria to give some more context, is that in places that were occupied by ISIS, women who are not part of the government, who are unarmed, have built women's houses in the towns where women were being sold, and they go door to door to Sunni Arab homes. Mind you, most of these women were Kurdish, and then they recruited Sunni Arab women to go door to door to talk about the women's role in society, because the Kurdish women stand at complete odds to the Arab women's experience of their role inside of society. So they're women liberating women using engagement, using ideas. They're not using violence. And what's come of that is that young women have joined the police force. Arab women have joined the army and are involved in politics. And so it's really remarkable that there's something about us as humans that wants to be able to express ourselves in an inherently free way. And when given the opportunity and it's positive, it's immensely rewarding. We feel the reward of it. When it's negative, we feel it detracts from from our existence. And you're seeing it in real time. It's absolutely amazing.
Look, I get it. You are burnt out with today's healthcare systems and options that are being offered. Maybe you've gone the conventional medicine route and you've gotten basic lab testing done and everything came back as normal, but you still felt like something was truly wrong in your body and you still struggle to get better. This is why I'm so passionate about what we do at Rachel Shear Nutrition. We are not like a lot of the other functional medicine practices that are out there. We are not a one-size-fits-all program. The system that we developed was actually what I wish that I had when I was struggling with my own health issues, when I was on 5+ medications and I was being told that I needed to have my entire large intestine removed. I saw firsthand what it truly takes to heal. And it's not just extensive labs. Yes, those are important, but truly identifying why we have these problems in the first place, which means we want to get to know you. We want to get to know your lifestyle, your diet, your trauma history, the things that you walked through. We also bring in something called psychophysiology, which is the mind-body connection. And this is what it really means to have a holistic approach when it comes to healing. So if you're sick and tired of the conventional what approach without truly healing, and you're sick and tired of working with functional practitioners or just giving you cookie cutter plans, and you want to learn more about the RSN approach, you can book a free call by visiting rachelshear.com. Could you talk a little bit about the difference between matriarchal and patriarchal societies and really the difference? Because I know in dinner you were talking a little bit about how in these matriarchal societies, how women are really viewed and the role that they play. And I had actually never heard that before, and I thought that was really powerful. And then part two to my question is, why suppress women? What is the goal of doing so? And do you think it's something deliberate and intentional, or do you think it's something more unconscious where there's just an internal fear of power, whether it's through femininity or sexuality, where it's just inherent a desire to do so?
Yeah, I'm going to answer the second part of the second question first, and then I'll go back to the first one. I think what you find when you look at cultures all over the world and you spend time with them and you see the behavior between men and women, whenever children are isolated at a young age, or whenever they're programmed to behave or see people, groups a certain way, it really starts to manifest and build on itself. And so when little boys are not allowed to socialize with little girls at a young age, they start to develop very unhealthy relationships with females, right? And it's really based in fear. Every time I've seen this, I see the violence that's perpetrated on women as a function of fear. Fear of something I don't understand,
Wow.
I don't know. I'm near this thing and it's giving me an emotion or a feeling or a sensation, right? Which is totally natural that you would be near a woman and have some kind of sensation, especially if you've never been near a woman before. And I'm terrified of that feeling. So what do? I become violent, or I become mad or angry. And so I really see this as the wiring of a culture that programs small children to behave that way. And so what happens is, once again, boys kind of get this software programmed them very young. And then as they get older, and now women are basically trying to self-preserve or protect themselves. And so they become more submissive inside that culture because of the repercussions are real, of being beat to death or killed or whatever it may be. So yeah, I think that it's definitely an inherent, and it's very consistent in a lot of parts of the Middle East and Africa where I've spent most of my time. This is intent is very hard to prove unless somebody admits it. And I think that's something we always have to be very cautious of really trying to understand, what is the reason for that? I mean, children are innocent in any place, anywhere that they're born. They are born innocent. And as my father used to always say, if you have any doubt about how human we are around the planet, children's laughter is the exact same everywhere else in the world. And so I really think that there are some institutions, some ideas, formal and informal, that really capitalize on suppressing women because it does either make them deal with their own internal issues or it makes them feel like they're more in control of society. I had a very interesting conversation. I was flying on a plane. I think it was in Saudi Arabia. There's this very highly educated gentleman sitting next to me. He had been educated at Harvard. He had spoke English perfectly, spent as much time in the US as I had. And he was Saudi. And we were talking about the covering of women and the role that they put on women inside of their society. And I kind of explained to him a little bit about what I knew, how much influence women really had in those environments. And he was laughing because, the women have a lot of power. They just don't have power from the outside, which is why women's movements inside the Arabian Peninsula, in Qatar, they couldn't drive the first time I went there. Now they can drive, women own businesses and things like that. But his perspective was that I'm honoring my women by covering them. And it's something that I'm doing because they should be cherished and protected and things like that. And I think that, you can see the perspective, but that doesn't make what they're doing wrong. And I mean that in this instance, because that human being should have their own choice about how they want to be honored. And once again, that power and empowering goes back to self-awareness and recognizing that that's not something you give somebody. That's something you see in somebody and you try to support them in being able to maximize it. The first part of your question about matriarchal and patriarchal, I think it's really interesting because I don't actually know the anthropological reason or how it happened that some of these groups became more, egalitarian between men and women. And so it's very rare when you find it, which makes it exceptional, but you then can see how beneficial it is to a society and how important it is. But essentially you can imagine that, prehistoric man, men had to defend, protect, hunt, and women were, making more tribesmen and girls, and then, protecting and taking care of the children and that in those cases. And so I think the patriarchal form of society was the more natural evolution as they were trying to defend the tribe from the saber-toothed tiger. But there are limits, I think, to how far a society can go for all the reasons that we've discussed when you're suppressing half of the population. And I think that when you find these cultures who have really been able to take, it to evolve and to actually step forward and try to create new ideas about how women should be treated, they're much better off for it. And America's a perfect example for that. We're a far better country today for what we've been able to achieve with empowering women. I think culturally we're still behind. I think politically we're ahead of most of the world. What I'd like to see is that political achievement be found more in the culture.
And how does that show up? Like, let's get a little practical here in like the day-to-day lives. How does that culturally show up? What have you seen in your life? And I mean, I think it'd be great to even hear from you too, because we're talking about this in kind of a high level, like, how is it still affecting our day-to-day life? And I'll say as Americans, because we are all American here.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of conversations today where when you're in an environment and you're competing, or you are, trying to start a business or be an athlete or whatever it is, and you start to think that you're helping that person by giving them privileges to the front of the line. You're now making it, you're not actually, I'm not empowering you if I give you a 50-pound weight and carry 40 pounds of it. That's a delusion. That's not reality. And so I think what we really are finding today in society is they're misconstruing success with empowerment. It's like, I'm going to give you the results without the work, and now I'm empowering you. No, you're
So
not.
good.
You're actually taking away
Absolutely.
from the power of that person, because you actually don't know what they would be able to achieve.
You're
if
viewing
you
them
just-
as less than, less
Exactly.
capable, and so you're giving them a handicap in ways.
I used an analogy once with someone. I said, you see an adult play Monopoly with a child, and the adult knows that they're superior in their strategy and their intellect and their ability to play the game. But they don't want the child, they want the child to feel a win. So they rig the game and let the child win. But it's because they fundamentally believe they're superior. And to me, if there is a situation in which you're altering the conditions to produce a particular outcome, and that's being done, I'll just say it for myself. If that's being done for me, I actually see that as something as a lack of respect and belief that you and I could, at least on an intellectual or professional level, physical is different because men and women have different abilities in that regard when it comes to sports. But those things, we should be able to both play the game and may the best man or woman win. And so I think that's definitely important.
I think it was interesting, the conversation we were having also at dinner, where Lauren, you and I were talking about how when a man is more successful, it actually opens up his options when it comes to dating and picking an ideal mate. However, when a woman is more successful, it actually does the opposite. It's harder to find a mate.
I would say success, power, and authority or prosperity for a man is always a good thing and going to increase his chances of both in friendship and I would say in romantic relationships as well. But for a woman, power, authority, prosperity, and success, it decreases that. Why do you think that is?
Well, you both described the experience to me. I've never experienced that, but it was really, I think, fascinating to me about it is it says a lot more about men than it does about women. To me, is that there's a heavy amount of insecurity amongst men when it comes to women, so they're not able to deal with the success women have. And I shared a little bit with you, my view and perspective of women really comes from my mother, in that, she is beautiful, powerful, successful woman. And so for me, that was what I learned a woman is. And I never saw any instance between my parents where she was any less than equal to my father in anything. And he still opens the door for her, and he's 80 years old, and did everything he could to empower her in all of the ventures that she wanted to do in the way that he was able to do so. And so I saw that relationship being an example of my father being very confident and successful in what he was and being aware of himself and wanting to cherish my mother. And I think that relationship, it has to come from where men are aware of the fact that you are not going to always be right, or you're not always going to know everything, or your success is great, but that shouldn't define you. There should be more to who you are as a person than just the superficial things that you create around you. And if you can see that, if you can have the self-awareness to do that, then a strong, beautiful woman is something to cherish, not to fear. And I think a lot of men aren't looking at themselves and saying, and I think that once again, they're taking the path of least resistance, right? We're human beings. We want to take the path of least resistance.
Well, I think anybody who's most in their power is not going to be swayed by somebody else's power and will be able to really hold space for another person's. But it is interesting when, whether it's a man or a woman, because we'll also see this with women as well too. We'll see women who can see another woman's success or their beauty. We see that quite a bit, even probably more often, beauty, because beauty is like the thing that is most noted in women, and men maybe they'll feel the insecurity or that through another man's success. But I think true power comes from not feeling swayed in any direction from another person's beauty, success, or any of that. But it's this ability to hold space and honor, and to try to be powerful is very different from actually being powerful. Because I think at the core in these instances, somebody's trying to feel more powerful. And so they're trying to puff up. They want to shrink the other person. We can see this with women who are competitive, right? And we talked about this earlier about, hey, I don't want my husband, facing this other beautiful woman, right? So I want to kind of shrink this other person so I can feel more superior. So it's this suppression of the other where it may egotistically make the other person feel more powerful. But the reality is the person who's most in their power is they're not swayed in any direction by somebody else's power or beauty or any of that.
I think it's exactly the point, right? It's where this whole conversation has been derailed. You cannot become more powerful by trying to take something from somebody, because your power is inside you, right? And I would describe it as free will. So that is inherent to who you are. It can be maximized, but by trying to take away somebody's free will, constrict their ability to deal with reality, look at a beautiful woman, make this decision, that's not empowering you. It's not making you more powerful. It's a delusion. You're actually less powerful. And I think you've described it very well. That's exactly the essence of it.
Couldn't we actually say you are most in your power when you are empowering another? Because it's almost coming from the frame of, I am so good in myself. I have this internal power here that I can actually take some of my power and I can build up this other person to go along with it. But if there's a belief of this person actually pulls and detracts away, we begin to operating from this lack mentality. There's not enough to go around, and how you show up pulls or adds to how I am. And people play this game all the time, right? And so, we see this with women. They walk in a room and they see another woman who's maybe in their mind not as beautiful, and they're like, I feel really, really great. So they feel a little bit higher than thou, or vice versa. Then another woman walks in the room and they were feeling pretty good, and then that person views this other woman as more beautiful, then all of a sudden they feel less than. And then there's this internal drive to want to pull the other person down. So I agree with what you also said earlier about it's this self-awareness piece, because I think so many people are just operating from this place of not being self-aware. So all of this is just happening automatically within them. They're not even aware that they notice these things, or these things are happening around them. There's just this urge and there's just this feeling, and then they're acting on it. So it's really this reaction that they don't know how to do with. It's almost like what you said earlier about the boys who weren't brought up around other women, and there's this lack of awareness. So all of a sudden they're just around these other women, and this feeling comes up. They don't know what this feeling is, but they're like, this feeling's bad. I want to get rid of it. You stop doing what you're doing. Because if you stop doing what you're doing, if you're not this, if you like disempower, right, make the other person shrink, then I won't feel this way. Or maybe if I get taller, if I kind of puff myself up and I make myself better than now, maybe that'll make the feeling go away. So I think a lot of people are operating from this place of, I don't like how you're making me feel, so let me change you so I can feel a certain way.
It's very true.
And it's fear. Right.
Fear.
I think it's fear-based.
Fear, lack.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this. You mentioned that lack of proximity between, men and women at a young age and the stuff that creates. But, I've heard people more recently talk about how in America, young boys are growing up where the father is working outside the house the majority of the time. The mother's running the schedule. The majority of teachers are female. And so there's this lack now. It's almost so much female emphasis for the young boys, and that it seems like there could be some adverse effects to there being a lack of male role models. And, some people, and I think this is where the conversation gets a little interesting, because I've heard many guys say, well, it used to be that, women were suppressed, but now we have the quote opposite problem. Now we have the problem that women think they don't need men. It's difficult to date because women are so self-sufficient. They don't need you to provide and protect anymore. What can I offer when you don't feel that you want or need me at all? And so I've heard guys talk about this and say almost, and to them, they're saying like, we feel like we're the marginalized ones now. We feel like we're the ones becoming suppressed and obsolete. We feel like we're the ones doing this. Do you think there's truth to it? And whether there is or not, why do you think that this is starting to be such a feeling that a lot of men are having?
Well, the game just got harder. That's the difference, right?
Yeah.
Football 100 years ago is not the game it was today. And that's basically what's happened. So, before too long, it was like, okay, I've got to get a job, work 9 to 5, pay for the house. The woman stays at home, takes care of the kids. I understand the rules of this game. I can accomplish this. This is a simple format and I can succeed. But the expectation of women is much more about men now, right? They want you to have a high emotional quotient. They want you to connect on an intellectual level. They want you to be able to understand more than just provide food and shelter. And so that makes the game much more challenging. And I don't know if there's truth to it or not. I'm speculating in this sense, but I think, for the guys out there who find this difficult, it's a challenge. Challenge yourself. Challenge yourself to be self-aware, increase your emotional intelligence, try to understand why are you not able to connect or understand women. I think that there's a lot to be gained from men and women being able to explore as a man their feminine, side and feminine understanding, and as women their masculine understanding, not replacing the other side, like still be who you are, but understand that. And I think that we get very comfortable in who we are on our side of the coin. And we're like, okay, this is the line demarcation. I'm not going to go over there. You do you, I'll do me. And I think that people were forced into relationships with very little work, because it was just the way we had to survive.
Well, I think we've evolved from the dependent type relationships. So if we think about how things used to be, the woman was fully dependent on the man. So I need to be with this man to provide food, shelter, security, and protection. So a lot of the decisions weren't really based off of, I love this person and what this person is really giving to me and maybe adding to my life outside of these basic needs that I have. And then the man was also very dependent on the woman, right? And we can even look at this from maybe some motherly type needs, emotional needs, sexual needs. So we saw these very dependent-based relationships where almost people would get into this relationship and marriages where it wasn't actually from a place of choice. It was more from a place of need. And I think as a society too, we've evolved past that. We've gotten to the point where then we evolved into these independent relationships. So men and women are equal. They're coming into relationships and it's 50-50. So women split everything and men split everything. But I also see too, at the core of this, we've also neutralized a lot of the polarity that exists. So there was a level of polarity that exists in these dependent relationships, but they were very dependent relationships. And we would see the man dependent on the woman dependent on the man. We evolved past that. We created these 50-50 style relationships, woman and man independent. But I think at the core, if you're a very feminine woman and you're a very masculine man, you're also not going to be happy in that style of relationship as well, because now this neglects the fact that women and men are fundamentally different still. So we neglect that fact and we make women and men exactly equal, split it all, like the opening the car door, the chivalry stuff, that kind of goes out the window. We have separate bank accounts, we split the bills, and then we wonder why there's no passion, there's no excitement, there's no sexuality in the relationship. But I think there's this other level that I think people are beginning to evolve into. I know this is really the level that I'm at and you're at, and it's where both people come into it independent, but they're able to honor the difference in the other person. So women are able to honor their unique gifts that they bring. And the man can also honor that in a woman. So women bring forth more compassion, more empathy, more of a nurturing energy. They can bring forth more of that sexuality into the relationship, especially if the woman has a very natural feminine essence, and not saying that women can't have actually a bit more of a masculine core essence that can exist, but let's just say for most women, they have more of this feminine core essence. And also she's really embodied in that. And then a man is also really embodied in his masculine core essence that he carries, and his strength and his leadership. And he's operating from a grounded place, not trying to prove himself. I think there can be a relationship that exists where it honors the polarity, the unique differences between the man and the woman. But then we're also still operating from an independent place and whole versus a dependent style relationship. But where this comes in with what you guys were talking about is it creates a level of more choice, right? Because before it was a need, and then we evolved into this 50-50 style, which there's still a level of choice in it. But I think there was the lack of honoring. And that's what we've seen a lot more in the society, where now there's this third level where it's really two people who have done the work, they're self-aware, like you've said, but it can still honor that unique polarity that still exists within both.
Really what you're describing is an evolved consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
So, as you perceive things in the world and you start to process that information, as you look through, what all of the demands that are coming in, and you start to process it and how it impacts you as an individual, that creates self-awareness. And as you start to make decisions based in reality on those things, that evolves your consciousness. And so I think to your earlier question, how do you drive American culture to kind of live up to the political successes, the institutional successes we've had in our society from a governance perspective, being treated equally under the law? I see in some places right now we're regressing as people are starting to take things away from women instead of it doubling down and enforcing them. And the reason is because those ideas are not based in reality. The things that they're pushing don't have a foundation in reality. So what we want to see, and I think this goes back to, as you're describing, here we are in this world where people are coming as equal parties and seeking more than just dependency on each other. How do we bring those two things in concert with each other? And I think we always want to look at the government as the person or the entity that should solve the problem, when we ultimately know they're good at nothing. So we don't want them to do anything. We know they're necessary.
Yeah.
We want them to do as little as possible. It's really having conversations like this, talking about this, understanding each other, defining, what does power really mean? What is reality? What is fact? What is truth? When you define these things, it's not my opinion what truth is. Truth is the recognition of reality. Reality is something I have to observe, see, touch, sensory. And so when you start to define what it is, now you can start to make decisions about how you're going to take this evolved consciousness and fulfill yourself. We want to seek more from this amazing world we've created than just the material stuff we have. And I think, honestly, women are ahead of men on this because you are intuitive. You are, inherently have a higher emotional quotient or a sense of being able to feel things. And I think that comes back from, the process of birthing and raising children. You've got to take care of this thing who can't speak and understand that it's happy, not happy, and what its needs are. So I think women are ahead of the game in emotional quotients and this evolved consciousness. And now men need to catch up. That would be my...
So one thing I was thinking about, when you were talking about this kind of the polarity we've lost, and I think there may be one other element that's really about us as women, is that when positions of power and authority or professional success have been equated with masculine traits. And so we have seen less examples of power and authority and professional success embodied in a feminine package. I can speak for myself in that, I've worked in so many male-dominated spaces or been in so many male-dominated rooms. And there's always a feeling inside of me when it comes down to things like picking out what I'm going to wear, when it comes down to how I sit and present myself, of trying to suppress the femininity or any type of youth femininity and try and project more masculinity. And this comes down to, imitating, certain styles that men, and I've seen, there's a really reputable speaker who's a woman, and I won't say her name, who is actually teaching women how to sit in professional settings, how to put the shoulders back, how to do power positions to,
Like, how am I doing?
to trigger, but it was specifically to deal with men, to show them that you are equal to them. And I know that there's some truth to all of those things, but in my own life, I have felt that need definitely to, suppress that. And it's interesting. So my very first book that came out right before we went to publishing, the manuscript was done, and I had a co-author who's a company commander in the Iraq War, and we were taking it to a well-known publisher. There was a writer who's a man, he's very well known, I also won't say his name, who read the manuscript and said, it's brilliant, it's great, can't believe it's her first work. She's a nobody, and people don't receive serious subjects as well from women. And it was written, about his time in combat in the Iraq War. He said, so I'm offering to you, I'll put my name on it. I'm very highly credible. You're going to sell a lot of copies. Cut her out. She's nobody, and no one will ever know anyway. And my co-author, to his credit, called me up, first told me the whole story. And when I heard it, I said, look, Jeff, his name is Jeff Morris. I was like, this is your life and your story. And you don't need to spend that on a fight for me. Put the guy's name on it, sell 1 million copies, do what you need to do. I'm okay. Like, it's fine for me. And he was like, not in your life. He's like, you're going to put your name on it, and you're going to put your damn face on the back too, next to mine. He said, and you're going to stand loud and proud for that. You're going to do it for all the women. And if someone says that women can't write serious subjects, well, let's show them. And I was actually emphatic. And if you go back and look at my first book, you'll see I only have my initials LC. I don't have the name Lauren on the front. And I said, at least let's make people not have the first impression that it's a female name on the front as a co-author. We've come leaps and bounds since those days. And the interesting thing is now I've written 13 books. I've worked with every member of special forces. I've worked with former prime ministers. I've worked with all kinds of world leaders. Out of all the books I've written, only 2 have been for women. I've worked with a lot of men. And actually, it ended up being an incredible asset, even that our collaboration worked in a different way. And I had many guys say, look, had I worked with a male author, I don't think I would have been able to dig in and tell parts of my story that I was able to with you. Even though you didn't see combat before, you were able to create a better version of the story. That
Probably
was
get into the emotional pieces and
I
really pull that
I feel
out.
like you're in my head. So that's one of those situations in which there was a pivotal moment. And it's a very personal thing for me. But I wanted to, even the fact that it doesn't say Lauren on there, is I'm trying to create a masculine impression for the world so that you think maybe I am
You're
a man.
taken seriously.
And to be taken seriously. And so, and that's very true in so many, times in which I'm thinking, well, if it's my first time meeting someone in a professional sense, I never wear a skirt or a dress. I'm always wearing, pants or try to look tall or, these kind of things. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But at the same time, I think that maybe we as women have begun to feel that we need to imitate masculinity in order to have authority or power or success, when in fact, I think maybe we also need examples of power, authority, and success coming in a feminine package.
And I think based on reality, that's an important, thing, because there are women out there who, have been successful, or at least have been pushed into positions to be seen as successful, but people see through that. And I think that really detracts from the credibility of women. And to credit to the army captain or the soldier, that I think that kind of idea of you worked hard, you did the work, you earned it, be proud of it, and I'll stand beside you. I think that is something that's deep in the American culture. So how do we reach down and pull that up? And I think what you'll find, particularly from people who are veterans, they'll always stand by somebody who they think worked hard for what they did and achieved, regardless of whether they're women or men or one-legged or purple. Nobody cares, right? Because it's an attribute that's systemic to training for combat, right? You can't give somebody special circumstances because combat is the ultimate equalizer.
That's true.
It doesn't matter. If
Very
you're given
true.
exceptions now, those are going to cost lives later. So I really think that experience shows what we need to do as a society. When you have those opportunities, capitalize them, but do it based on something in reality.
Yeah, I think that's so good.
I feel like as I've gotten more into entrepreneurship and business, I feel like I've always wanted to bring forth like more of that feminine side of myself. You'll see me in like business photos wearing like sundresses and things like that. And but I totally understand exactly like what you're saying. And I think it's very common to want to feel like we're taken more serious, especially when you're playing the game with a bunch of men too.
Yeah.
And I think for myself, I was just like a one-woman show for so long. And it was like, all right, as long as I bust my ass and I work hard enough. And I'll also say functional medicine too is also a more female predominant space as well,
now.
like nursing.
Hopefully we'll change that.
For now with everything. But I think that's so powerful for women to hear. In your opinion, what would you say the role women could play in this, men could play in this, and then society as a whole?
Give us a few keys on this subject.
Look, the fundamental basis for solving any problem like this is having a good grasp of what is reality. Because if somebody achieved something and the basis of how they achieved it was fabricated or was not based on any type of rules that were, standardized for people to achieve, then the quality of that success is not the same. And I think in many instances, you can imagine how we've tried to solve problems by giving people privileges that were not earned. And the consequence of that is now we understand empowering is creating shortcuts for people in order to win whatever it is. And so what we have to acknowledge is that it is a fact that women are capable of doing an immense amount of things, almost in modern society, anything men can do, quite frankly, right? And so that is, a given, and that we don't need to try to give them special circumstances to be successful. What we need to do is see what are the things that they're naturally successful at and invest in those. And that requires two things. Number one, being able to actually see somebody, actually listen to them and hear who they are and see their talents and see their gifts, and then invest in those. And also be self-aware enough to know what you can and can't do and how you can and can't contribute. And I think that those three things, the understanding of reality, what is the recognition of reality, i.e. truth? How do you understand that? And then how do you see a person? How do you see their value? And how do you try to work to, empower them, right? They have the power already. How are you supporting that power and maximizing it? And I think that the person that you co-wrote with, probably wasn't doing it intentionally, but that's exactly what he did. He saw your gift, he saw your talents, he saw your accomplishment, and he was like, I'm with you. I'm going to build on that.
And look, it changed my life. Launched an entire career. One action did.
And I think it's inherently American. I really do believe that's integral to the American code. We want to see people succeed. We want to see people work hard, and we want to celebrate their success. And so I think that's fantastic. Those would be my three things.
I love that. I love this conversation. I think
Me
it's
too.
really powerful for people to hear.
Yeah, thank you for
And
sharing.
now we're
your
going to go
insight.
get some nachos.
All right. Well, thank you guys for having me.
Thank you for coming on
Yeah.
Unlocked Podcast. If you guys enjoyed today's episode and if you got a lot out of it, do us a favor, share it with a friend. We would love to hear your feedback. And until next time,
Same lot, new keys.